I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to writing a book, and yet I am 10,000 words into my first draft of my first novel. I am taking this dream of becoming a published author one day really seriously, and a part of that has meant that there is a lot for me to learn along the way. And a part of that process, and one of the best ways I've learned, is through reading about writing. So I have started reading writing craft books. And the first one was Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, and it's so good. I could probably take 20 to 30 lessons from this book, but I will say, as a beginner writer, there were 5 lessons that I was able to take away from this book and immediately apply to my first draft that I'm writing.
Hi, and welcome. I'm Stephanie, and if you're new here, I'm chasing my dream of becoming a published author while navigating a very full life, and this channel is where I share that journey. Now let's get to it.
So before I could even worry about things like sentence structure, character development, or even my awkward dialogue, I had to do something first, and I got this from Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird. It was permission. I had to give myself permission to write, but not only that, I had to give myself permission to write badly, and Anne Lamott nails this point. The shitty first draft is probably the most repeated takeaway from Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird, and for good reason. And it offers you freedom to write right out of the gate. And who doesn't love and need freedom in their creative process? But there is a catch. The freedom that the permission slip offers you is only truly free if you can accept it for yourself. If you can really take in what it means to give yourself permission to just be free to write whatever. This freedom lets you believe that your first draft can be as messy and as unorganized as it needs to be, just for something to come out, just to get something on the page, which is honestly in this stage the most important thing. You know, when I was reading this, it kind of reminded me of like journaling. I journal some really vulnerable stuff. You know, even when I'm journaling, I don't really care too much about my spelling or if my sentences are making sense or if my punctuation is correct. And that's kind of what I'm trying to treat my first draft as. I mean, for example, so far in my draft, I have about 10,000 words, and about every other word is spelled incorrectly. My dialogue is really awkward. I've contradicted myself in the story several times, but at this stage when writing the first draft, it's okay if it's shitty, and that's exactly what Anne Lamott tells us. And that's encouraging. Honestly, that's really encouraging. I knew that I needed to give myself permission because that was honestly the first hurdle, was just to say, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. I have a concept, yes, but I don't have everything fleshed out. I'm not very good at writing a novel because I've never have before, but you know what? It just has to exist. And that was the first thing I did when I finished that chapter, was I got this sticky note and I wrote, it just needs to exist. And I stuck it on my computer and it has been living there since then. The other thing I had to do was, please don't make fun of me, I wrote myself a permission slip. I literally typed up and printed a written permission slip because that's just what my brain needs. That's all I can say about it. That's just how my brain works. It's just what I need. And if you need to have a written out permission slip to get you seated in your seat to start writing just whatever is coming, go for it and do it. I did it. This is what Anne Lamott says in her book about the shitty first draft. The first draft is the child draft, where you let it all pour out and then you let it romp all over the place, knowing that no one is ever going to see it and that you can shape it later. You just let the childlike part of you channel whatever voices and visions come through and onto the page. While giving yourself permission does relieve a lot of the pressure, nothing takes away the daunting idea of the average word count for your genre. I'm working on a romantasy, and from what I can tell, the word count expected is 90,000 to 120,000 words. And wow, that is a little overwhelming. Which brings me to the second big takeaway from bird by bird, and I've been having to put it in practice. So overwhelm is something that I struggle with in a lot of areas of my life, and I've also been feeling it when I think about tackling my story. My ideas in my head, my story is huge. I've already kind of have mapped out 3 to 4 books for this series. And it's honestly very easy for me to get lost in connecting dots while I'm writing to what's going to happen in book 3. And I'm only just trying to get a first draft of book 1 out. And if I start spiraling into that phase, I'm just done for it. She says that we should view our story as a 1-inch picture frame. So instead of thinking of our whole story as just like this big daunting task to undertake, we should really break it up into smaller pieces. And this made me think of something that I really loved when I was younger. Have you ever seen the movie titled The Patriot with Mel Gibson? Gibson is taking his sons and he's teaching them how to shoot a target. So we can think of our book is our target. We're trying to complete it. And he tells his sons that in order to hit the target, he uses the phrase, aim small, miss small. And him saying that back then, this was back in 2000 when I first saw that movie, really struck a chord with me, and it made a lot of sense to me, and it has been helpful for me in a lot of other areas of my life. And I really feel that that is something that I can apply here as well. And what I've learned so far by doing that is that my brain and my process works the best when I'm just thinking about scenes and moments in this first draft phase. So instead of trying to think of my story and where everything goes and all the plots and things of that nature, I think in scenes, in moments. I can't even do chapters. That's a little bit too much for me right now. So when I actually go to sit down and start writing, I'm not saying, okay, I need to get chapter 4 done today. No, I'm just saying, okay, I'm just going to write a scene. I'm just going to write a moment. That's my capacity. That's what I can do. But oftentimes once I start doing that, then I start writing several scenes. And that's how I've gotten to 10,000 words so far, is just going scene by scene. One of the other things that gets me in the overwhelm is situations like this. I just read the book, When the Moon Hatched, and look at it. Look how big this is. This is huge. And honestly, there were times when I was just holding this book in my hands that I was thinking, how could I ever write this much? But then I realized that the comparison just isn't fair, because this book has gone through the first draft phase and probably several revisions. And so the comparison game is a pitfall into just feeling like you're never going to get through it. It feels daunting. And it's always going to be a losing game when we start playing the comparison game. But the bigger picture here that I really would like for you to take away is that the aim small, miss small tactic can look different for everybody, because we all move towards and achieve our goals and aspirations based on who we are, what we can handle, but also sometimes it just comes down to the season of life we're in. So now that I can look at my story from a smaller lens and put into practice my aim small, miss small, I can sit down and I can start writing. But there's another little culprit who likes to get involved, and it's the little voice inside our heads. And Anne Lamott speaks about that, and it's something that I definitely have to take to heart. So in this book, she actually talks about that little voice in her head, and she refers to it like a radio station, and it's titled KFKD, and it's pronounced K-fucked. It is the nonstop chatter that's going on in our heads. It's the good stuff, it's the bad stuff, it's the imposter syndrome, it's the fantasies that are happening, it's the fear that doesn't allow you to write, and that stuff can be on a continuous loop. And as writers, you really have to pay attention to that and making sure that it's not overpowering, getting too loud, or just festering during the process. Sometimes it's like 1 minute I'm thinking, wow, my story is awesome. I love it. I can't wait to write it all down. And then the next second I'm like, why do I think I can write this? I'd have no experience. What authority do I have to sit down and write a book and try to get published? You know, sometimes the voice is really loud and it's just like, you suck. Sometimes the station is really loud. Some days it's not. And there are tools that we can put in our toolbox to help us quiet down that station so that way it's not so intrusive and getting in the way of our writing process. Some things that work for me have been taking like a 2-minute meditation, going for a quick walk around my block, or even just journaling some of the stuff in my head or trying to combat the stuff in my head. And what this radio station says is not rooted in truth, and none of it is justified. And then once we find a place where the radio station has gone a little bit quiet and we sit down and we write, I gotta say that one of the funnest things that comes up for me has been the surprises in the writing. This has by far been my favorite thing about writing a novel, and it's the funnest part, and it's something that Anne Lamott speaks about in her book too. And it's the concept of letting your characters just surprise you. I could be writing a scene and out of nowhere a character will say something or do something that I wasn't planning on, and that is just so wild to me when that happens. Like, where is this coming from? It's almost like I'm not in control of the story, and that the story is able to take on its own, like it's alive. It gets to develop however it wants to develop. And I love that feeling. It's so fun. I was once writing this little short story, not my novel, and there was a character in there, and she walked into this shop and had a coworker with her. And when she was getting ready to leave, the coworker says goodbye, and then he winked at her, and I was like, why did he just wink at her? Is there something going on there? And it just opened up this whole nother landscape of questions and wanting to explore. And that was so fun to me because I had no idea this character was going to wink at her as she left. Sometimes these surprises reveal tension or desire or fear, and you get an opportunity to kind of explore a little bit. And I think the wonderful thing, especially in this first draft phase, is that these surprises don't have to stick around for the final revision or the final draft. These are just moments that invite you to explore a little bit more, to maybe learn something different about your characters. You know, if at the end of your story and at the end of your revision, if a scene or a moment or a surprise that you ventured down to doesn't fit the story, that's going to come out in revision, and that's fine. It doesn't have to, but you can enjoy it along the way. And the other thing that I've noticed is that when these surprises start coming through, that's like been a signal for me that I'm in a really good flow state, that things are just happening and going. And who doesn't love a creative flow state? Isn't that kind of what we live for? And as much as I would love to always be able to sit down and write from that magic flow state place, it's just not feasible to build a writing practice around that magic because it doesn't always come, right? So what do we do instead? Well, we got to keep returning to the page. And I wouldn't say that this takeaway is isolated to Anne Lamott and her book, Bird by Bird. This takeaway of creating a writing practice that keeps you returning and creates a pattern of consistency is something that I've heard from every author who has had a book published or just has a really good writing practice. It seems like the one common denominator is having a dedicated writing consistency practice. But I'll be for the first to say that consistency is not easy in a full life, and it's not something that you can just cold turkey jump into. But there is a silver lining and there is good news, because consistency can take on any form that is customizable to you and your life and what you have going on. You know, my version is not going to look like me waking up at 5 a.m. and strictly and rigidly trying to complete 2,000 words every single day. I'm just not there. My life isn't there. The season of life that I'm in right now will not accommodate that kind of rigidity. So I have to figure out what is going to work. I'm looking at my writing practice and returning to the page on a level of consistency by thinking of it as maintaining a relationship with the story and with the page and with the work. So what that means for me right now is that I am trying to write several times a week, and that writing session can look like sitting down to write a new scene for the story. It can look like reading a previous scene that I wrote or scenes and diving into questions that came up, needing to do research, or just planning and note taking. That is still maintaining a relationship with writing and with the story. Another thing that I know is going to help me for consistency is accountability. And so I myself have joined a writer's workshop local here. It's going to help me understand the community and have some accountability in my writing. And not only that, but being proactive about being a part of the writing community really makes this dream of authorship feel a lot less abstract, and it feels more structured and real. And I don't think attainable is the right word. It just feels like encouraging to be surrounded by others who have shared goals or who have reached their goals. And there's something really validating about all of that. Now, I will say that writing alone is necessary for me, and I think probably most writers writing alone is a bonus. I really love that part of writing, but isolation doesn't support the writing life and going down the path to reach your dream and your goals of authorship. It has to be, in my opinion, coupled with some community around writing that is supportive. And I think it's just a recipe of a really good balance between the two. I think my biggest takeaway here is that to be successful in writing, you have to have some kind of consistency. And I'm still learning what that looks like for me. And that can take a while. And that's okay, because we go through life and life calls us to different things, and we go through different seasons that maybe call for different fluctuations in that consistency and what it looks like. And I'm not beating myself up for missing a day. And I'm just staying encouraged that I'm going to find my stride in what this is going to look like for me. My biggest takeaway from reading Bird by Bird is not how to write a book, because I still don't. It's mainly that I know now that I don't have to know and learn everything just to begin writing. And more so that the practice of writing itself is really what's teaching me. I'm still at the very beginning of this writing life, but I've started, and you can start too. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that everybody listening has a really wonderful writing week.